Hello, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon. It's really wonderful to see so many people here. My name is Jenny Wenger. I am the Director of Programs here at the Linux Foundation Public Health, and I'm really glad to bring you this webinar, Introduction to Vaccine Credentials, and our first event that we're having specifically targeted in Asia. So it's really wonderful. A little bit about the Linux Foundation Public Health. We started this this summer. Linux Foundation overall has been thinking for a long while about moving into healthcare, and the pandemic really made us decide to accelerate that plan. So we started Linux Foundation Public Health, and so far we've been focused mostly on helping public health authorities figure out what to do around the topic of exposure notifications. So cell phone to cell phone communication to see if you've been nearby somebody who later tests positive for COVID-19. As that has become more mature, we are very happy that we've added in our second work stream, which is around vaccination credentials. So in December, we welcomed in the COVID-19 Credentials Initiative and its three co-leads as staff at the Linux Foundation Public Health. And we have been now working to help public health authorities and companies all navigate the world of vaccine credentials as well. So it's all, very exciting for us. We are glad to be making so much progress, and we expect over the next year to be adding in many other areas of public health related software to help public health authorities and companies figure out how to really make sure that the health of everybody continues to be a positive and improving thing. So if you do want to get involved with Linux Foundation Public Health, there's a couple different options, and I'll drop these all in the chat in a few minutes so that you can follow them. One is that you can visit our website at lfph.io, and you can sign up there for a newsletter. A second thing is that if you want to get more involved, the best thing to do is to sign up for our Slack, and then you can message me or one of the other LFPH staff members to figure out where it is that you can get more involved. If you do want to talk to LFPH about membership, we do have on the line here our LF APAC team who can help out with that and give you more information there. No matter what, we are very glad to see you, and I am really excited to introduce Lucy Yang, who is one of the co-leads of the COVID-19 Credentials Initiative, a native Beijing Ren. She is really been taking a huge lead on vaccination credentials and has jumped into this and is an absolute expert on the topic. So she comes to us actually right now from Toronto. And with that, I will pass it over to Lucy.
Thank you, Jenny, for the introduction. And hi, everyone. And good morning, good afternoon. And then probably some of you, it's also good evening. So as Jenny mentioned, I'm based in Toronto, and also originally from Beijing. So it's really nice to be here and also do this webinar. And like Jenny mentioned, as the first event to the Asia Pacific community from LFPH. So before I dive into our main topic today, which is vaccine credentials, I want to provide some context by introducing CCI, the COVID-19 Credentials Initiative, a little bit, and how we evolved to what we're today and the relationship between CCI and LFPH. The CCI was initiated in April 2020 after COVID-19 started to spread out globally by a group of technologists who were working on emerging technology and also emerging standard called verifiable credentials. And the technology were being worked on and deployed in both private and public sector for various industries and use cases prior to COVID-19. So when COVID hit, we realized tech could potentially help address some really important issues. So that's why we came together and formed this community where we identify COVID use cases and discuss the use of this technology and its implications, especially around interoperability, privacy, data protection, and many other related issues. And at the same time, like the community participants, they present what they have built in their local context. We have participants from North America, from Europe, and from Asia, and from South America, and also a few I know from Africa as well. So we have been serving as a forum for them to present, to exchange ideas and learnings from each other's experience about like 8 to 9 months until December. And that is when we joined a Linux Foundation Public Health and announced like the shared mission of joint effort, which is advancing the use of verifiable credentials and the data and technical interoperability of verifiable credentials in the public health realm, starting with vaccine records for COVID-19. So our conversation with LFPH started in late summer 2020, not long after it was founded, when we realized CCI needed to engage more with public key decision makers and stakeholders, especially in public health, for us to keep doing meaningful work. So when LPH had achieved success in exposure notification apps and want to start addressing vaccine credentials, it all naturally happened, and happened fast because we were very much aligned on the key values and goals. And the most important one being, building interoperable and privacy respecting technology for COVID and public health use cases. So CCI is now hosted by Linux Foundation Public Health, and we're working closely with LPH staff and advisors. And I believe, we'll be working more closely with the APAC community and also the APAC community of Linux Foundation, and also just broadly in the Asia Pacific region on the most important issues for vaccine credentials. So before I get started with my, the main topic, I also want to introduce like my colleague, John Walker and Kalia, as they were going to also talk a little bit about the work during the presentation they've been working on. Like Kalia been working with serving on the WHO panel for the vaccine, smart vaccine certificate, and also John has been leading our work in North America and recently in the US, leading a subgroup engaging with public health authorities on how we can roll out vaccine credentials in Asia. Just a little bit more about John. John is a solution architect who has a lot of experience in software architecture, data infrastructure, and with especially with existing healthcare systems such as FHIR and standard EHR and FHIR. And his recent work has been on data capturing and transporting between legacy health systems and verifiable credentials, especially the inclusion of HL7 formatted data to be leveraged in the creation of an immunization credential. So Kalia, John is based in the Bay Area, the same as Kalia. So Kalia Yang, and she is our ecosystem director. So Kalia is our digital identity expert who has facilitated the birth and growth of many identity standards and technology, which work behind the scene of our everyday life. And Kalia has been a strong advocate for user-centric identity, which verifiable credentials are built to achieve. And her deep relationships in the verifiable credential space has helped us understand the complicated landscapes and intricacies of the tech, which are key to achieving full interoperability. So with that, let's get to our today's topic, vaccine credentials. So I think at the very beginning, I want to make sure that we provide the context and what are vaccine credentials in the in CCI and LPH context. So here we mean using of an emerging technology, emerging standard, verifiable credentials, which is, if some of you may know, is a W3C certified standard already to present proof of COVID-19 vaccination, which can be verified digitally as an alternative or as a complement to a vaccine record cards, which are being used in a lot of countries right now. So why we want to use verifiable credentials, and what are like the benefits, compare verifiable credentials compared to paper credentials. So here our belief and what we know is verifiable credentials have the potential to provide the close experience to paper credentials while offering additional benefits that paper credentials can't offer. So here I want to use an example of like Sarah, what would be her experience like if we're using the paper vaccination record. So what would happen to Sarah is, so when Sarah go to a clinic and get vaccinated, she will get a paper issued to her, which has the details of which vaccine she took on which date, and also with her personal information like her date of birth and her name. And when Sarah got the vaccination record before she leaves the clinic, and the clinic staff will say, "Oh, Sarah, this is your only legitimate proof of vaccination, so please keep it safe." So Sarah takes the vaccination record, paper record, and whenever she goes to a place where that record is required, she will have to present it. And for example, when she goes to work, when her workplace is reopening, and Sarah will be asked by her security guard, "Oh, please show me like your vaccine record, and also I need to see your photo ID because I need to know like if you're the person who has the credential." So Sarah, she has to present the paper record to the security guard, and also probably her driver's license or like her ID card. And once like security guards see both credentials, and like, okay, I mean, you're good to go. Then Sarah entered the building. So here, there are several question marks here. So what if, because Sarah only has that one piece of paper. So what if Sarah lost her only card? And also, what if Sarah fabricated her card, right? It's a piece of paper, and you can easily find similar materials, and also just have it printed out on paper and then fabricated. And how was the security guard supposed to know the card was authentic, was issued to Sarah by the vaccine clinic? And the next question is, what if Sarah accidentally dropped the card in water on her way to work, right? And the text went blurry and probably even just can't be used. Then how is she supposed to present that piece of card? And the last question is, did Sarah want the verifier to see, the security guard to see all her information on her driver's license or on her ID card, and also on her vaccination record card? So with this question, let's see what will happen if we're using a verifiable credential. So Sarah will still have to go to clinic. So instead of receiving a paper card, what would happen is after Sarah get vaccinated, she will receive a vaccine credential in her digital wallet on her smartphone. And then when Sarah goes to work, and instead of presenting paper card, she can present the credential. She can present a QR code which can be scanned by the security guard, and then after security guard scan the QR code, he will get a yes or no. And when the security guard get a yes at this in this situation, so what he will know is the yes means the vaccine credential comes from a place which has authority to issue it, and the vaccination actually happened, and the vaccination happened to Sarah, who presents this piece of credential, and the credential hasn't expired if there's an expiry date. So that's which is a very different situation compared to paper. And you may wonder, so why all these 4 questions got answered, and we got assurance of the answers of those 4 questions by using verifiable credential. And then one thing I want to point out here is I think the key thing to emphasize here is no actual relationship or no integration or no third-party intermediary that stands between the clinic and the security guard or the office building that Sarah is entering. But still, the security guard can verify at the point when Sarah presents a credential. So there is a technical trust that lie between like the issuer and the verifier in this scenario. So the security guard doesn't have to worry about when he gets a yes, it actually is a question mark yes, where is the yes that we saw is actually definite yes. And the trick, like the key here, the secret here is what we have in between, instead of a third party intermediary, or instead of like issuer acquiring a database from the verifier acquiring a database from the issuer, is we have a public utility in the middle that makes sure there's technical trust in there, so that when the security guard get a yes, he can be sure of the 4 things that we mentioned in the previous slides. So here, without getting into too much technical details, we want to summarize a little bit what are like the pros and cons of verifiable credentials compared to paper. First, so let's start with the two things that paper has and verifiable credential has as well, like user control. User control, we mean with paper credentials, Sarah will get the piece of paper and she will have control of this piece of paper when she wants to present it and who she wants to present it, which was the same case with the vaccine credential in Sarah's digital wallet on her mobile phone. Another merit that paper has is interoperability. By interoperability, we mean as long as Sarah has that piece of credential, paper record, wherever she goes, she can just present the paper and she doesn't have to worry about if the security guard, or if she goes to a cinema, or she goes to a stadium, if the card can be verified, because it's verified by like a human being's eyes. So in the case of verifiable credentials, because we're building on an open standard, and we also can ensure that interoperability. So no matter what vendor you're using, right? Whether you're using a proprietary solution by your employer, or you're using a just general wallet, like something similar to like Apple Wallet, you don't have to worry about I have to download another app if I want to enter like a stadium compared to entering to your office building. That's something verifiable credential can offer, and the same benefits as what paper has. And what paper doesn't have, or verifiable credential have, is first is tamper evident. So because we have the advanced cryptography and unique architecture, which I was showing you earlier, there's no even though there's no intermediary, there's no direct integration between verifier and the issuer, between security guard and the clinics. There are still like there cryptography used to make sure that when there's the information Sarah has, she wouldn't be able to tamper it, and that's the reason why when security guard get a yes, he can be sure it's a yes. Another very important aspect of verifiable credential is privacy preserving. Privacy preserving in many aspects, and two of them being most important is, first, when Sarah is presenting the credential to the security guard, she doesn't necessarily have to present the whole piece of credentials. The security guard doesn't have to know which vaccine she gets and on what day she gets. He only will get a yes or no. So Sarah doesn't necessarily have to reveal more information than what is needed. So that's another privacy preserving aspect, is because there's no integration between issuer and verifier. So when Sarah is getting verified at her office building, the clinic won't know like Sarah goes to work, or at what time Sarah goes to work and use that piece of credential, which avoid a lot of like the concerns about am I being surveilled by using this piece of credential. The next thing is durability, which is quite obvious because with paper you can easily drop in the water where like you lost the paper, and with verifiable credentials you have options to back it up for example in your Google Drive or in your computer or on another phone. And also you can also choose to back it up if the solution provider provides an alternate an option to store it in cloud. So the idea is there are many backup options. Like even though like your phone is broken, your phone is stolen, or like there's something wrong with this app, you'll still be able to get back your credential through the backup. Compared to paper, there's probably no other ways of getting paper if your paper get lost. And the sixth benefit that verifiable credential has is portability. So we imagine that there will be proprietary solutions built for particular use cases. For example, Sarah probably will get her vaccine credential through the app of her employer, which she also use for other work-related situations. So the question is, what if Sarah has, is leaving her company? Can she still use that piece of vaccine credential, which is issued initially to her app which come from her employer? The answer is yes. So Sarah can actually because if they're using verifiable credentials, Sarah can carry that piece of credential to other apps she's going to use after she leaves her company, which means that she doesn't have to ask for another piece of credential, which is probably not even possible. And the next thing is binding. So binding here means, remember, like in the paper credential situation, Sarah has to present both her personal ID, which could be, driver's license or ID card, and her vaccination record card. So in the verified credential situation, so Sarah can hold multiple credentials already, including her driver's license or her passport or other personal identifiable information on her digital wallet, which can be binded, which can be bound to her vaccine credential. So when she is asked to present her vaccine credential, when the security guard is verifying her, actually she's being verified also if she owns that piece of credential as well, which is the binding, is combining data sets into that one verification. So that's another thing. The last thing is no single point of failure. This is what we mean by a no single point of failure is because the verification happens on the mobile phone, on the edge device, which doesn't involve any querying of databases. That means even though if compared to querying a database, if the database something wrong, like the database down, then they won't be able to do the verification. But in the case of verifiable credentials, that won't happen because verification happens on the mobile device. So these are like the main benefits, and two of them the same as paper, similar to paper, and the six are the unique to verifiable credentials. And I think here we also want to discuss a little bit, because there are also other, as some of you, as probably all of you know, there are other digital alternatives that we can use for vaccine credentials. So first, like being a PDF, which is very actually similar to paper, because it's just pretty much having the same information printed on PDF. And obviously PDF is easier to store, has more durability compared to paper, because you can back it up multiple places. But the key drawback is, first, it's not tamper evident. You can fabricate a PDF document, and also it's not privacy preserving, because you still have to present all the information you have to the security guard. And another two alternatives, which first, proprietary software. Here, what we mean proprietary software is those software that are not built on open standards. So those, which means if we have all millions of this kind of software built and not on open standard, it can create a lot of silos and monopolies, and it won't meet interoperability, the type of interoperability vaccine credential needs. And the same thing with network and platform, because as standards are evolving, there are more like private closed networks are coming together, building their own standard and building on that standard, which are not open standards, which will have the same kind of effect as proprietary software that is not building standards, and will create silos and won't meet the interoperability needs of vaccine credentials. So next, let's talk about now that we understand a little bit more about what's the benefits of using verifiable credentials versus paper credentials and other digital alternatives. So what are the implementation challenges we have when we're building on verifiable credentials for vaccine credentials? So first, being like emerging standards and technology. So as I'm mentioning earlier, is this is an emerging in the sense that first, in the vaccine credential particular context, there are certain elements haven't been defined. For example, what elements needs to go into that piece of vaccine credential, so we are making sure each individual, when you're getting a credential, you're having the minimum of data that you need, so that wherever you go, right, you're going to Europe, or you're going to North America, where you're going to different places, you're going to stadium, where going to your workplace, you have the information that, like the basic information that is needed for you to get verified. So that is not defined yet. And next was the verifiable credential. That's the particular technology, and we're talking about. It is a W3C certified standard, but it's still at like version 1, and this is still evolving. and there's still certain aspect that not standardized yet within this standard. So which is also something we're trying to resolve and to make sure that there will be full interoperability. And the third thing being the other technical specifications that are related, like verifiable credentials needs to build on, are dependent on, are not fully standardized yet. That's also an area of challenge, and also an area we need to work on to ensure full interoperability. Another challenge here is existing infrastructure and workflows. So when we're talking about vaccine credentials, because there is already existing infrastructure in place to manage immunization record and vaccination record. So we're talking about how new technology and emerging technology can be leveraged to provide an alternative, or to provide a complement to existing systems. So which means we need to understand what are the existing issuer or sourcing information flow, and how verifiable credentials can fit into that existing flow. And second, like vaccine record registries, right? This is different in different countries. Some countries it happens at the national level, some countries happen at the province or state level. How, if we're talking about using this technology more on a broad basis, how we can work with existing registries, right? How should these existing registries be a data source for our credential? So this is something we need to understand more. And the last thing being compatibility with healthcare systems, which means how that's what my colleague John has been working a lot on, how existing healthcare systems need to be integrated into working with verifiable credentials, so that the data flow can flow like smoothly as it should be. So that's our like three things that we need to look into when we're talking about how to use the technology for vaccine credentials. And the third thing being communication to the public and public trust, because what we're used to is holding a piece of paper, and now that we're asking people to switch to using technology, and that's something like we need to communicate what this technology is about, and why this technology is being used, and how it will what it means, how it will be used, so what it means to their user experience, right? And also depending on where you're at, and depending on the local legislation, I think there are people who care about, okay, how my privacy can be protected, right? And how am I able to use it wherever I go? Like, is it interoperable? Like that's a lot of questions we need to answer, so that the public, we can build the public trust, and then we can like have a wider adoption when vaccine credentials are rolling out. And the last, and being very, very important, is ecosystem building and governance. So when we're talking about the Sarah case, we talk about, okay, because there's advanced cryptography and there's a unique architecture used for verifiable credentials, so there is the technical trust that is there, which doesn't require direct integration or third-party intermediary between verifiers and issuers. But what are other things that need to be in place? Especially we're talking about like using vaccine credentials in particular for particular use cases, for example, the travel industry, going back to work, reopening public places. So there are a lot of rules that need to be defined, which I've listed some of the questions. Who define which issuers have the authority to issue vaccine credentials, right? I can't just, like Lucy can't just, have download something and issue credentials to John or Kalia, right? There needs to be rules, and who should define the rules, and who are the legitimate issuers. And also how Sarah is supposed to know if the verifier has the authority to check her credential, right? I can't just go and ask Sarah, like, I need to check your what if I pretend to be a security guard and check Sarah's credential? So we're talking about whoever are holding that verification, have access to the verification system, also needs to be some kind of like legitimacy and also authority there to make sure like Sarah is not being coerced or being forced to be verified by someone who doesn't have the authority to do so. And another question is what if Sarah doesn't have a smartphone, right? We have to consider the situation where if we're talking about verifying verifying credential digitally. So like in our example, Sarah is receiving credential in her digital wallet on her smartphone. But what if she doesn't have a smartphone? Or what if, like, if Sarah doesn't have a stable connection to internet? Or what if the verification place, like the office building, or is in a place that doesn't have a stable internet connection? So there are a lot of situations and a lot of scenarios we have to take into consideration. We need to have rules and guidelines in place, which makes governance authority and the human trust and very, very important. So in the graph you're looking at, which pretty much explain beyond technical trust, we need human trust. We need human to work together as certain authorities come into place, so that we have governance frameworks which defines rules and guidelines in terms of who can issue, who can verify, and many other rules that need to be in place to ensure it's a trusted system. So lastly, I want to get a little bit more into, now that we understand what vaccine credentials we're talking about in the CCI and LPH context, and also what are the implementation challenges. So what is CCI and LPH's role, and what activities we're having and what goals we want to achieve. So there are three main groups of activities we're doing at CCI and LPH. First is communications, which we think is very, very important, and also we categorize our main kind of communication communication groups into three. First is public health authorities, which is the group like LPH has been working closely with for exposure notification app. So we hope to help the public health authorities understand the underlying tech and where the standards are going, and what is the minimal viable way to get something implemented that doesn't create interoperability headaches later. And also we want to work, and also we're actively engaged with commercial entities, for example, like businesses and workplaces who want to reopen safely and securely, and work with them to help them understand, what a lot of them are asking, or who we should work with, right? So that's why we're working with LPH members as well as CCI participants towards a list of potential vendors as a start. So this list of potential vendors, because we understand technology and standards are evolving, what we're looking for is who are committed to build on open standards and also evolve as standards evolve. That's the kind of vendors we hope to bring into the LPH and CCI community. And lastly is the general public, which we discussed earlier. That's mainly through mainstream media. Hopefully we can talk about the technology in a very, very easy to understand manner, and also address some of the concerns that come from the public, and to build that trust. And the other two groups of work, which is mainly on the open standard and open source development. So our goal is to building minimal viable components, identifying the components we can build on open standards to help public health authorities and the commercial entities who want to reopen to quickly build something for their own context, and also provide the reliable components and scalable components to help them speed up the process. And now we're currently mainly at the stage where we're trying to understand the existing landscape. Where are the gaps with the existing standards, and what are the existing efforts, and how we can align those efforts. And with open source development, it's the same. And we're trying to understand existing solutions. What are their technical stacks, and see who are already committed, who are already building on open standard, and are committed to building as standards evolve. And we currently have two work streams, like use case implementation work stream at CCI, and also our rules and governance work stream, which I will get a little bit more about what we're working on later. And also my colleague John, he will give more of a in-depth view of what a group we're creating, which is called Vaccine Credentials Focus Group, and we already made some good progress there. So before we get to the workstream activities, the group activities at CCI, I want to invite Kalia to talk a little bit more about her work within WHO, which has been selected as an expert to serve on the to contribute to smart vaccine credential standards and technical specifications.
Thanks, Lucy. I can't actually talk a lot about what we're doing because we sign confidentiality agreements, but there's about, well, in the current work stream I'm in, there's over 80 people participating, and the work is to define global standards for what's on a vaccine credential and looking at open standards for expressing and exchanging those credentials. So it's great to be part of a global community working on this and to bring the work of CCI into that forum. And there's several different people from the verifiable credentials community broadly participating in the work. So I'm really hopeful about how we can shape, you know, the what comes out of that process.
Thanks, Kalia. I think probably, Kalia, correct me if I'm wrong, like there are 3 work streams at WHO, and you are involved in 2 work streams. The first work stream is mainly working about what you talk about as the elements, what need to go into the credential.
Yeah.
And the second work stream is about the enabling technologies, and verifiable credential is part of that. And that discussion hasn't happened yet, but it will be like in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And there is also a third group which focus on the communications and also the ethical issues around using a smart vaccination certificate. That's the 3 work stream.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. And here at CCI, so what I've listed, a unified verifiable credential data format and standardized VC exchange protocols are something we've already identified as like the gaps, whereas the pieces are not standardized yet, and we hope that CCI and LPH can take a lead on converging those efforts around those 2 items. Yeah, and on the open source development, as mentioned, like our goal is first minimum viable user experience for each individuals and businesses to start fast, secure, and a little to no cost. So here we're mainly talking about, you know, if any small businesses, they need to verify vaccine credentials, what needs to be in place for them to quickly, so that they don't have to adopt, you know, they don't have to pay to build their own apps. And that's minimal viable user experience. I think the main kind of efforts will be around minimal viable components for public health authorities and businesses to work with their solution providers to contextualize easily, cost effectively, without interoperability headaches. That's a very similar work which has been done in the exposure notification apps by LPH. So this is like the open source development efforts. You know, we're thinking about a universal wallet, something similar, you know, to like Apple Health, and also like basic issuer app or verifier app. So, you know, like a small like vendor can easily adopt, or we can, public health authorities or business can use that and build on top of it for their particular situation. So lastly, just very briefly on the community work that has been happening at CCI, the use case implementation work stream, which pretty much like the forum that we haven't had to identify first, like verifiable credentials that are most useful to the COVID response and provides that, you know, platform for solution providers to present their projects and solutions that get community input. And here, so now like we have a focus on vaccine credentials as a use case, but at CCI, the community level conversation, we're not only discussing vaccine credentials, but also test results credentials, which also be very important, because the wider distribution of vaccine will still not there yet. And also there are other complementary credentials that can be used. For example, how a governance authority can issue a credential to a verifier, which will issue so that they have, you know, they can show that they are authorized to do their work. So all this kind of the credentials related to COVID situation are also being discussed at CCI. And the rules and the governance workstream it has been the group where, you know, rules and guidelines are being defined for general or particular COVID-19 verifiable credential use cases, and develop MVP governance frameworks to enable solutions to be deployed at speed. So last year in 2020, we have developed 2 versions of governance framework, generic governance framework, and now we're ready to, since we have a more of a focus on vaccine credentials now, we're ready to customize, contextualize that framework for particular use cases. And the third group, which I was talking about earlier, is the group we're forming. I would like my colleague John to provide a more kind of overview on what we're working on.
Great, thanks, Lucy. So as Lucy mentioned, with the advent and arrival of the vaccines for COVID, folks in the community have had a lot of interest in shifting our focus to the development of a vaccine credential. And in doing that, we've realized that we need to engage public health authorities, their software vendors, and commercial vendors in the space to engage PHAs in the dialogue, right, of where can and how could a vaccine credential be applied. So our group is geographically focused. The overall charter is international, but we recognize that obviously in the different geographies and jurisdictions around the world, there'll be very different models potentially for how a vaccine credential could be implemented. And so we've started with again, just from community members, started with a US focus group or subgroup, and that group is working to identify the information and data flows for the public health authorities in the United States, members of the government, the private sector that we should engage with to come up with a pattern for implementation, and then finally in line with the work in the work that CLIA is doing in the WHO and from the CDC in the United States for the pattern for the credential itself. So we're using, we're just forming the group, we're just getting our charter finalized, but there's a lot of great activity and dialogue going on via the Slack channels. So I invite people to please join. And like I say, we're using the US subgroup kind of as to develop a pattern or template that we could share and roll out to other jurisdictions and apply their domain expertise. So come join us.
Thank you, John.
Thank
yes,
you.
we have participants and from Europe in the US group, because they want to see how how that group got started, and they also discussing how they can start their own group. So like John said, like the US group is just like a starting point. We definitely welcome like folks from different parts of the world. Either you want to form a regional group or from a country specific group, everyone is welcomed. And also if you're interested in seeing some of the work that's being done at the US subgroup, which I think John is leading, like even before the group is formed, we're because the recent executive order from the Biden administration, there are a lot of community momentum to respond to the particular items related to vaccine credentials, and that's been actively going on. So if you're interested in joining some of the conversation and see how similar efforts can be formed in your own country or your region, everyone is welcome to join. And that leads to the last slide is how you can get involved. I believe this slides will be shared later, so every one of you will have the link, so you can click into if you want to join our mailing list, which is pretty much announcement and notifications, and also community discussion. And also, as John mentioned, we're very active on the LPH Slack, which we already have a channel for CCI and for vaccines, and also for our US subgroup. So yeah, everyone is welcome to join. And that's the end of my presentation. And thanks, John and Kalia, for pitching in. And thanks, everyone. Let's come to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I hope that everybody enjoyed that as much as I did. So please do continue to enter your questions into the Q&A. There's a bunch of good ones in there already. And we'll answer some of them in the time we have. And if there, I see one of the questions already there about the slide deck and link to the recording. So if probably tomorrow evening, if you go to the same website you used to register for the event, we'll have the recording and the slide deck up there. If you want, you can also, we'll also email those out to everybody who registered as an attendee. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. An easy one to start with. But maybe we'll go with one of the, there's one that got upvoted, which is that there was recently a initiative announced called the Vaccination Credentials Initiative. How is that? Is that the same as CCI? Is that different? Do you just have names that are similar? What's going on there?
So there's several initiatives with similar names, with similar goals. And as the ecosystems director, I'm working really hard to connect with folks who are connected with those initiatives. And there is nothing to report because it's all like, you know, the flowers are all blooming and we're working on connecting the dots so that folks are able to, everybody is trying their best to solve these problems. And so we will work with anyone who is aligned in trying to solve the problems. So we'll see.
Great.
But they're different than us. And the same is true with the IATA travel pass. There's a question about that. We're also in connection with the people who worked on that project. So we are doing our best to connect dots.
Great. Next question. Oh yeah, Lucy, you want to jump in?
Yeah, probably just to add one point to what Kalia said. I think the good thing we have seen, like either was VCI or was IATA, is they're all building on verifiable credentials, which gives us a lot of assurance, right? It's more like Kalia said, we need to actively engage in conversation, which actually we are actively engaging conversations with all this big initiative that is going on and trying to see, what's our role, right? What our role like LPH and CCI and how we can align efforts, work collaboratively. Just add that.
Great. Another question from the audience. How does blockchain relate to verifiable credentials?
So I can take this one. So while it's true that a blockchain could be used to persist keys and other credential information for issuers and holders, it is not required. Blockchain is not a requirement for the trust triangle and the issuance and usage of verifiable credentials, but it is one option for the persistence of data that's used.
Does blockchain make it better or worse, or like what would be the?
Well, so that's a very loaded question, but so there are use cases where the persistence of blockchain or on a blockchain could be advantageous. There are other jurisdictions like under GDPR where it's problematic, and you have to be very careful about who controls the data on the chain. So it's really use case dependent and jurisdictionally dependent, but it is an option.
Great answer. Thank you, John. So Juanito Mercado wins the most questions asked award. Thank you. One of the questions is about how, like, there's all these people who are getting paper credentials right now. How do we get them onto digital credentials later? How much is our focus right now on just making sure that the paper credentials can be, like the digital credential is the same as the paper credential? And how much are we trying to enhance the paper credential? So two sort of different questions there.
I'm happy to.
I can probably start.
Go ahead, Lucy. No, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I want to give like a non-technical answer, and then probably John, you can dig in a little bit. So I just want to touch upon like one thing I mentioned earlier about the vaccine record registries. I think some of you guys are asking about it here too. And there are different ways of issuing credentials. It can happen at the point of care, which is pretty much what is going on with paper credentials, and also can happen because for public health purposes, there definitely some kind of like registry that needs to have, and it can be that registry can be the source of data. That's something we're looking into, and it really depends on because some countries or some regions like provinces or states, they have like the record with personal identifying information, which means they can be the data sources. But in some countries, because of their like legislation laws, they're not collecting any personal identifying information, which makes that registry probably not viable for issuing credentials. So I think ideally, if there's a kind of like if there's an option, right, like people can opt in. I want to receive if they can't receive it at the point of care, they can say, okay, I want to receive verifiable credential later on, right? And that something can happen later on. And also there's challenge of asking all like clinics or like point of care like providers to install something or even issue something, because that could be actual work. So that's the reason why it's important, like the work we're doing with the US subgroup, or whichever regional group is looking into like the local practices and see how this can be embedded into the existing system without adding like workload, without being disruptive of what is being done now. John, please add.
I think you nailed it. That's okay.
Yeah, and John, yeah, I'm not sure, like John, I know like you were working closely with the US group in terms of looking into how like things are done. So if any kind of details, to share here, probably can give more context.
Yeah, I mean, the technical and jurisdictional details have to do with, as Lucy mentioned, identifying the system of record and making sure that there's a complete and accurate representation of what that vaccination event or test event was, and that whatever software agent might be, or software comes in later to extract that record, that authorization is trusted and privacy preserved.
And that actually, so, I think that there's a lot of thoughts around like, what is interoperability? How do we actually unlock travel? Are there going to be any issues if one country has a centralized way of issuing credentials and another has a decentralized way of doing it?
I mean, to my mind, not as long as the credentials themselves interoperate. There are strengths and weaknesses in both of those approaches, and again, it's really driven by the jurisdiction of the country and what their rules are. But neither model obviates the exchange of the credential information.
And this actually ties in really nicely to Giselle's question, which is for the issuers of the credentials, right? For whatever authorities are actually generating these credentials, do we need a global registry? How would we announce that? How do we make that piece of interoperability across borders work on the people issuing the credentials?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be one of those things that needs to get worked out. I know it's one of the reasons folks from our community worked on a sort of Prototrust framework to start enabling that. And my sense is that national bodies will, through their authority, be sort of deciding who can issue credentials, because they're also deciding who's doing vaccines, right? So this flows one from the other, and then it will be up to those countries to share who's authorized getting those cryptographic keys to them, to have the credentials issued so that they're then look upable in various public utilities, like we were articulating, to be able to check the cryptography on the credentials. But it's not like there's going to be one global registry for every credential, every issuer. That's partly the beauty of a decentralized system, is different countries who have different strategies around issuance can all, hopefully in the long run, all of those credentials are readable globally.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And we actually got a follow-up question to that that's not in the Q&A, but privately, which is, could this also work with self-attestation? So where the person who actually holds the credential says, I did an at-home test and I got a negative test, or I've already had COVID, or anything like that. Is that possible? Does that throw a wrench in things, or how would that work?
It's not clear how that would work, really. I think part of the power of verifiable credentials is there a way for entities to say something about another entity. They're like you could say almost anything you want in a verifiable credential. We're just happen to be focusing on use cases around COVID testing and vaccinations. So there has been some conversation I've heard about sort of perhaps like having QR codes on a home test that you could sort of scan and say, yes, I took the test and this was the result. And yeah, but for this particular use case, it seems like self-attestation may not be enough for people to believe in those credentials. Whereas a credential that's articulating my shoe size and my favorite color would be fine for self-attestation.
I think, Jenny, what I want to add here is also kind of a policy level question, right? So it's so like vaccine credential probably is one piece of credential that you can use to as a pass, where also the other credentials, because as long as vaccine is not widely distributed, and also there's a chance that people can't take vaccine, there needs to be policy in place. What's going to happen now? Are you going to use test result credentials, or are you using other ways so that people can still move around, those who can't have vaccines, were those who can't get tested? But that's more like a level of like higher level of conversation that happen in the policy level. And also like the self-attested is also a question about the level of assurance, which is some kind of like more like a jargon we use for identity space, right? At what level of assurance a certain kind of system needs for one to get into something. So probably like the self-attestation is a little bit lower level of assurance, which probably won't be accepted by most systems.
Got it. And with that, so we've just got a quick second left. So if any of our attendees do want to get involved and join one of the work streams or learn more about CCI and talk with you, what's the best way for them to reach out again?
So we have a slides that at the end. So I would recommend joining our Slack group. That's where like the LPH Slack channel, which we have CCI channel, vaccine channel, and also our US subgroup. I think that's the best way to join, and because that's where the most active conversations are happening. I would recommend that. And if you're interested in joining our mailing list, it's pretty much where the meetings are being announced, and you can have like a regular calendar invite. That's also a good place to go. And if you're just want to keep in just in high level what's going on, then just subscribe to newsletters, which will just give you like bi-weekly updates of CCI.
Okay, wonderful. And the website is covidcreds.org, covidcreds.org. So
yes, cool.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for sharing everything tonight. It was, I hope that everybody else enjoyed learning about vaccination credentials as much as I did. And thank you so much to everybody who attended. It was wonderful to see such a big crowd here, so many people supporting LFPH in our work, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. With that, have a great rest of your day, and we will see you around.